Welcome to Athletes and Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform to help athletes and other alumni network and connect and tap into various resources in finance and careers. But this show is all about the athlete transition out of sport. It's such a major issue today between health and financial literacy, careers. We interview former professional and also college athletes, and we talk about their journey and transition out of sports, ultimately into successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. So excited today to have Brandon Cullen on. How you doing, Brandon?
Great. Thank you. Great. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So Brandon, he is one of the hockey crazy people from Canada, where they love their sport and they do fantastic at it. So Brandon, growing up, he played junior hockey and then ultimately became a professional player. He was in the Rangers farm system for quite a few years. And then when that was all over, he kind of transitioned out, went into some different things in training and commercial real estate. But ultimately, he landed and started his business, which we'll talk about later, MADabolic, which he's the founder and chief concept officer. And they've got a great gym setup that's going across the country, starting to grow many different franchise locations. So, Brandon, I always like to talk about, as you were growing up, talk about how sports shaped you leading up into when you started playing junior hockey.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I never really identified as a hockey player. I know that's one of the big transitions is when people lose their identity. Kind of the way I look at it was I was a very good athlete that happened to grow up in Canada that kind of was put on skates at a young age. There was in my kind of family lineage, my grandfather and his brothers played in the NHL. My dad played pretty high level hockey. So being introduced to it made sense, and it wasn't a foreign idea by any means. Yeah, I mean, hockey was my winter sport. Lacrosse was my summer sport. And yeah, I chased that very common Canadian childhood dream, and that was to hopefully one day play in the National Hockey League, and got pretty close. Had a really unfortunate traumatic brain injury right at kind of the height of the career that forced me to then think about life after hockey.
Yeah, it's tough, and and we'll get into all that. I mean, just you play sports your whole life, and then all of a sudden, whether it could be injury, like in your case, sometimes it just people just don't have it. Maybe they'll play like depending on what sport they might play college, and and then it's over, and then all of a sudden you got to transition out of sport. So
Yeah.
I always I joke about it. Is that I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. Unfortunately, talent wasn't there, so I do podcasts, and I'm an entrepreneur. So let's talk about the education of transition out of sport. And I always talk about this, and a lot of times, if I'm talking to college athletes, I talk about, did their school do anything preparation? What kinds of things do they do from a hockey perspective? Is there kind of education along the way from the NHL or some of the other hockey organizations talking about transition out of sports and kind of giving you guidance on what's next after?
Yeah, I know they're doing a better job of it now, or at least they have the foresight that this is important. So I'm happy to see what is kind of happening now in the sport, whether it is sports agents setting them up with a better financial position leaving the sport or introducing them to investment opportunities early on. I gotta be honest, like I played in the minors, right? So there wasn't a lot that was available. And there definitely wasn't a lot that was forcefully suggested to you. There were some players I knew that the one program that was consistent in minor league professional hockey was transitioning into potentially a firefighter. So that was something that became something some players did. But yeah, the sad thing was when you're done with the sport, sadly enough, often the sport is done with you. And a lot of those connections don't go beyond the sport. So, as my experience, I was not set up by the sport I played. I was very lucky to come from an entrepreneurial family where that was how I grew up. I got to watch my father grind and build a business. So like that's what I knew, and I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but I can't say that the sport and the unions that I was part of set me up particularly pretty well, but I do know they're making a better push for that today, which I think is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've talked to, you think the same, it's probably the same across all sports. I've talked to some minor league baseball players, and they say the same thing. I mean, if they're not fortunate enough to make the major leagues, there's just a lot of them too. And I think you're right. I mean, it's like you're in sport, and it's not that they don't care about the athletes, but to your point, I think it's just more of like, they're what's in front of them now. I think it's the same thing in colleges too. It's like they've got their current athletes, and alumni in a sense don't really, not they don't mean anything, but just it's not there. So yeah, that's some of the things that we're trying to do is develop additional curriculum and workshops that might be able to help some of these organizations out to run alongside some of the things that they're doing, because it is such an issue. And I think every podcast I talk to these different athletes, and it's kind of the same consensus. It's just there needs to be more education, like you said.
Yeah, and I did have that career-ending concussion, right? And one of the things I always talk about, a lot of friends and family, they worry about the really bad side of concussions and some of the things we've seen in our sport, whether it be substance abuse and at the worst end of it, suicide. And the thing that I think is not talked about enough, it's not necessarily the brain injury. I think what helped me is I was able to channel that same work ethic and competitive spirit right into something else. And I kind of just had to shift the mindset of how do I go, win at business the same way I would have potentially won at hockey or prepared myself and all those things. And I think the conversation that needs to happen is it's not necessarily the brain injury, but it's the brain injury, the loss of identity, the nowhere to go post sport that eventually could lead to the substance abuse that on top of a brain injury. So I think it's a lot more multi-layered than just
Right.
concussions cause all these. I mean, they cause after effects, don't get me wrong, but like without having something to put that effort towards, I think it's a bigger part of the conversation that people don't acknowledge enough.
Yeah, I agree. It's it's tough, and there's this, I guess it's just finding there's people that want to help, and I think that's the thing. Athletes need to reach out and help, and just that is a big problem, like the identity too. Like I talk about all the time. We talked about offline too. Just are you Brandon the hockey player or Brandon the person that has many years ahead of you? And I think a lot of people feel that, especially the ones that kind of excel and like you and make it to that professional level. I think it's harder for them to kind of turn that off their identity that here they are their whole life they've been doing this, and now all of a sudden it could be in your case taken away because of injury. So let's talk a little bit about networking, connecting. It's such an important thing. Talk about doing it while you're still playing.
Yeah. I was a player that had a very active social life when I played, probably to a fault at times. But it was just a different time in sports too. But all those friendships and connections that you made during the sport, it is a good thing to lean on when you leave the sport. In fact, when I retired in Charlotte, North Carolina, it was the team that I played for, the Charlotte Checkers, which was part of the Ranger farm system when I was trying to kind of battle back from this concussion and just never happened. I remember having some conversations with friends, family, and parents. There was a lot of opportunities to maybe go to coaching with past teams and this and that, but I knew I wanted to do something on my own. And the idea of going to a different city and starting fresh, I don't know how I knew it, but I knew it was the wrong thing to do. I knew that I had enough supporters in the city of Charlotte, that I knew enough people that if I was going to give entrepreneurship a go, I thought this was the place to do it because, I had been a player that people enjoyed watching play here. And because of the sport of hockey, it gave me a reach. Let's just call it that at the end of my career, I was able to leverage a little bit and tap into that I think was very important.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the community kind of embraces you, and sometimes you wonder almost too at a minor league level across the different sports if there's more passion almost to the players and like just the fans around wanting to spend time with them, they're enamored by them.
Yeah, there's a couple benefits to being a fringe athlete like myself that I often talk about, you get used to failure. You get used to being cut often from those top tier teams. And I've always thought about it in a unique way. Like every team or new coach that you play for, you have to have a cohesive kind of bond in that team. You have to work for something bigger than yourself. Injuries and the battle back from injuries creates resilience. And then just the fact that you are not that good to just skate by, to use a bad pun. um, you kind of got to do everything right behind the scenes, and you get used to failing or getting cut. I never thought about it at the time, but the way that kind of translates into business ownership, I don't want to say you get numb to failure, but it is pretty easy to pick yourself up and move forward when you're used to getting knocked down often. And, I don't know. I don't know if that is an all sports thing, but I mean, like, being the best in the world at something has its own challenges, but just being an average fringe player, I think the resilience you gain of being average can go a long way if you think about it that way.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think it almost parlays too when you talk about some of these athletes that maybe they're in different sports, like maybe it's swimming or running or uh, wrestling, soccer, like some that might not have as much of a professional presence. And I think so they're already knowing that, okay, listen, when I'm done, I'm not, there's no professional career. So they're thinking more out of the box and big picture than maybe some of the other athletes that are kind of dialed into some of the more major sports that do have the professional level.
Yeah, and then the other argument too is it's kind of funny. Like I have two young kids, 12 and 9, and for me right now, team sports is super important. That idea of working towards something bigger than maybe your stats. Even in sports like hockey or football, where, the thing I love about hockey and football, if you think about them, is you can actually beat a better team with the right game plan and the right buy-in from a team. I kind of love that about it. Sports like you're a baseball fan, like you run into a hot pitcher, you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah.
That is what it is. Even like you think of basketball, some of the best players in the world, like there's certain times where Michael Jordan or LeBron James just decided they're going to win the championship this year and there's no stopping them. And I kind of love that aspect of learning from team sports at an early age. I think it really transitions into life. But it's the weirdest thing in contrast to that. I find myself watching a lot of single sport athletes now because I kind of love that idea of it's all on you. You have no one else to blame. So it's weird. Like I can see like the benefits of both. But I mean, transitioning into business ownership, many times you're only going to be as strong as the team you surround yourself with. And I think there's good lessons to pull from, team sports and single sport disciplines.
100%. And we'll get into that a little bit when we talk more about the entrepreneurship. So I always ask this question or two fun questions. And so it's a little different in your case because sometimes I'll say, if we're going to kind of go back, it's like one of these back to the future things. So what advice would you give to Brandon graduating from high school and entering the junior hockey, which I mean, you're probably playing before you ended, but just, what advice would you give looking back?
There was a lot of downtime that I didn't use right. There was a lot of bus trips. I mean, the minor leagues, right? You're not flying on private jets. You're on 6 to 12 hour bus trips through the night where you're sitting on a bus by yourself. We played a lot of cards and that, but there's a lot of downtime that you could educate yourself in things that you're passionate about. I wish I would have known that because then it became a lot of cramming after the sport. When if I think about those, especially from junior into professional, those 9 years straight of 70 games a year, 35 of them being on the road, being in a bus by yourself. You can do a lot. I think you could learn a lot more. One of the things, not to get too off track here, but I didn't really enjoy school. I was good at it, very good at the math side of things. Didn't really enjoy the reading and English side of things, but I think it was because there was no content I enjoyed. It was just the curriculum that you had to do. And I kind of fell in love with learning after school. And if I was to go back and tell myself, like, I knew things I was passionate about, I would have spent more time getting ahead of what I thought I may have done after the sport in those off hours.
Right. Okay. So let's take that then the next question, kind of the same thing related in 10 words or less. What advice would you give to Brandon as you were kind of, winding down on the career?
I got to be honest. I do think I was an outlier that did transition very fast. I don't know what I could have done better. I think I have a little bit of a superpower that's good and bad from compartmentalization. So as soon as something's done, it's done. And
Right.
I'm not looking back. So I remember the day that I went into my neurologist's office and he said, "We're never going to medically clear you to play hockey ever again." And I think by the time I had got to my car, I had already been thinking about what I'm going to do next. So I don't know what I would tell myself, but I would tell someone like myself that was a little bit lost that there's a lot of time to chase things as you're playing the sport. Even like when I talk to my young sons now, they all, they believe they're going to play in the NFL, both of them. And I said, you can run into a bad injury, buddy. What could be after the NFL? What things do you love? So I don't know. It's a really tough thing for me to answer because you're actually asking me to live in the past, which I don't do.
That's good.
And yeah, tough to think about.
I will say it's a fun question sometimes when they reflect back, especially like I'll say like, talk about your freshman year, like going to college, and then talk about your, when you graduated, what's, what advice would you give then? And depending on the age of the person, I mean, it's always, it brings back, you see some smiles, like, am I going to give the version of like the PG version or like, or what else could I say
Yeah.
about that? So let's talk about alumni engagement. Obviously, an alumni direct is something that's important to us. Um, Talk about, I guess, were there like now looking back, or is there movement towards alumni hockey players per se? The former players getting together, whether it's from a team or whether it's from just a bigger group, and not just in the sense of hey, let's play like do a golf tournament, but more so working together and helping each other.
Sadly, and I like that what you're trying to do here because I mean, sure, there's a LinkedIn group of ex minor league hockey players, but I mean, the type of real conversation or real support, I don't think it exists. I'm fortunate enough to now have a solid group of guy friends that are all business owners that we do specific things with, but we had to create that. We had to
Right.
say that we want this, we need this, and it's very unique, right? Because we all have, I think, certain skill sets that we admire about someone. Like I might be more brash and black and white, where they are more empathetic and great managers of people. And like the same thing I want to learn from them, they want to learn to be more black and white from me. And so, but we had to forge that. We had to create it ourselves because, it wasn't out there for us. And it definitely wasn't, part of the sport that I see. There's still players that became unbelievable friends that you stay in contact with. But when you think of like 10 seasons, 20 players a team, you can make an argument, a couple hundred people there that were in your life. And, maybe 5 or 10 of them you still talk to 10 years, 15, 20 years later. So, yeah, there's not, I think what you're doing is kind of important because it's not normal to have access to that.
Yeah, I think, and that's what we're trying to do is bring the community together. Like, we have an athlete community center that's, all athletes, all sports. And I think it's, we kind of hit on it before. There's that little bit, and we'll talk about this next, kind of that skill set, the DNA. I mean, being involved in a team, regardless of what sport it is, if you are playing on a team sport. And I think bringing that community together. I mean, what are some other things that you think would have helped you or help other athletes as they do transition out of sport from a resource perspective?
Well, I think you touched on it earlier. I would like to see the leagues be proactive about it, not have to wait to the end of their career to offer this. I don't know if there is a way to reach people at a young age. You know, it's kind of funny too. You just never know. Like I do remember our annual, they're called the Professional Hockey Players Association with the HPA meetings. And I got to be honest, like being a 22-year-old immature asshole, you know, you didn't take these things serious because you thought you were
Yeah.
invincible at 22. And I don't know how you reach me at 22, but I know it's important looking back now. So it's a really difficult question to answer. You know, I know it's needed. I don't know how you reach that person. So I think conversations like this at least point things in the right direction, I think is the best way I could put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of the challenge too. Even like when you talk about, having the workshops and the curriculum for these younger athletes, is just they're not paying attention. Like they have their blinders on, and I guess that's something that needs to become more focused. Maybe it's other former athletes that have gone through it and kind of taking that mentoring type role and just saying, listen, I was where you were at. I was just like this young stud, and I get where you're at, but you know what? There's going to be a life after, and that's what's going to happen next. So yeah, were you going to say add something to that?
I was going to say, so my co-founder, his name's Kirk DeWall, we met playing here. His best friend, they grew up on a cul-de-sac together, is Brian McCabe. I've had a long 15-year, I think, NHL career. Great guy that I've got to know through my best buddy and co-founder, Kirk. But just to give you an example, like he is the head of player development for the Florida Panthers. And they, he actually got to get that ring after their win last year, which is pretty cool after not being able to do it in his own career. But like his whole job is to nurture those star players that are the next in line for the Panthers, to watch their AHL career and to give them the skills and the guidance so when they transition to the NHL that they feel supported. But everyone forgets, like, that's such a small
Yeah,
pocket of athlete there. They're that person that is going to the NHL. It would be cool that could be provided to the majority of players.
right.
The players that probably most of us don't make it.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, and those are the kind of people you need to identify, and just to work together and develop these programs that will help out. So let's talk about we've kind of touched on it throughout, but the athlete, the DNA, the skill set. Talk about how that prepares athletes into successful entrepreneurship or business leadership.
Yeah, I think I touched on, I mean, like, obviously, I own a fitness company now and we franchise the model. And I got to be cautious here because it's not just a blanket statement,
Right.
but I do believe in, some forms of stereotypes. I think you should at least pay attention to them. And we seem to do very well with franchise partners that do come from an athletic team sports background. And that's not saying I don't have some awesome franchise partners that don't have that background, but I would not be against only franchising to people from the athletic background because something about that commitment to something bigger than yourself, following a game plan that is better for the organization. There's something that like it's hard to put into words, but it's extremely valuable. Like to take someone through a franchise system is essentially a playbook, right? And if you can get your teammates, which we like to consider our franchise partners, to commit to the culture and follow the playbook, they are very successful. So I think that's why you do see, and not just fitness, you hear a lot of ex-athletes that get into many franchise brands that do very, very well. And I'm willing to bet that they are more used to following a playbook than the majority of everyday people. I'm being cautious on tiptoeing
Right.
around this, right? Because there's outliers everywhere. There's going
Sure.
to be athletes that are you don't want to do business with,
Right.
and there's going to be everyday people that are going to be some of your star players.
Right.
But I think an athlete thinking of what could I do after my sport? I really believe a franchise is right up your alley. It's what you're used to, and it's what you know, and you could be very successful with it because of your background.
Yeah, 100%. I think, and that really parlays even into, hiring athletes. I mean, so many companies look to hire athletes, and I mean, I always bring up there's one guy that was on the podcast and a former college football player, and ultimately was the CEO of a couple large companies. And he said, and he implored athletes, look, when you're done, like people want to have it's the leadership, it's the perseverance, team, everything that we've talked about here. And it's so important. And you bring up a valuable thing with the franchising. We had another, one of our other podcasts, we had a former baseball player, and same thing for him. He was kind of, he talked about being lost in his transition. Fortunately, he had a mentor that was a franchise consultant and talked about getting him into the business. So he ended up, buying a franchise, being very successful, but then also getting into consulting because he felt like, look, if I'm as a former Major League Baseball player, if I can do it, other athletes can as well. So it's interesting. You got kind of validated there, just what you said.
Yeah, and the other thing we're actually getting a little bit scrappy and like playing into this right now. So the one thing is people ask us like, what's your ideal franchise owner? And I may label exactly who you're thinking about, right? It could be like a 30-year-old ex-athlete who maybe is still single, doesn't have kids yet, ready to work, and has $400,000. Well, that's a bit of a unicorn too, right? So now we are one of the creative things we're looking at is you find this person with the athletic profile and background, because money is a lot easier to find from like an absentee investor that wants to invest in the right person, and trying to kind of like pair those people up. Money is a lot easier to find than the culture fit. And one of the strategies we've been looking at the last couple of years is getting into more conversations with ex-athletes or people at the end of their career that are transitioning, looking for an opportunity, but might need some financial assistance. And you know what's kind of great about it too? A lot of times the financial person doesn't want to be the owner operator. They want to put a face in their business. So, there's a lot of ways to do the franchising side of the business, but again, yeah, we work extremely well with athletes, but that's not to discredit just everyday people
Yeah.
too. It just kind of is what it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, and a lot of people that might not have, played at a level of college or professionally were, grew up playing sports too. So, I mean, they get all that,
100%.
as well. So let's talk now about, so you went through some different things, like we talked about, you kind of, after hockey, but ultimately landing in the fitness space as well as being a franchisor. So talk about the journey to starting a MADabolic, and then, what you're doing today, and how people can find you.
Yeah, so when it's kind of weird how I fell into training. We talked about it offline, but I was that guy, the in shape guy on the team. I wish it would have translated to more goals. But if we were measuring who won the physical test outs in camp, it was usually me, right? So players, I grew up in a hotbed just outside of Toronto for hockey players, so we all competed with one another training in the summer. And it got to a point where people said, "Hey, Brandon, do you mind if I follow your training program?" And at 21, I'm like, shit, I better get certified so I can charge for this. I used to bartend at nights, train athletes in the day, and train myself before I went back in to kind of bartend. And that was, a 4 or 5 year period. And then when the big injury happened, I always use this analogy. It's kind of funny. I think like athletes, especially that get into the fitness space, they think that they're going to be Tom Brady's trainer, right? And we all believe that. And one day you wake up and you realize that there's more opportunity training all the Brady Toms of the world that work at Bank of America. And so that's how we kind of fell into the fitness space. When we looked at the industry at that point, there was very good like sports specific training. And then there was like your kind of YMCA level boot camps. And there was nothing like good for, call it like your 25 to 50-year-old ex-athlete that was just looking to, age athletically and keep having high quality training, but also being aware of where they were in life, right? So we set out to build who we were. And we've been kind of refining and retweaking that for the last decade. And that's kind of our sweet spot. I mean, we do very well with 25 to 50-year-old professionals that are a little bit more type A, and they're looking for a little bit more structure and accountability out of their workout or their training program.
Yeah, that's great. And what's a typical size of the gym, and is it all just like traditional equipment? Like how does all that lay out?
It's all class based. We've done a lot of rework to shrink the footprint, but not to compromise the product. So we're able to do what we do under 3,000 square feet, which allows you to get into the right kind of real estate to do well. We do a smaller class size than traditionally what you see in boutique fitness. And kind of like our angle is, yeah, I'm always cautious, but like we are here to train you, not entertain you. So like our consumer expects to get better every day. They want to improve their athletic ability. And I get why our competitors do what they do. There's nothing, it's not a good or better thing. I just think we offer something unique to the high performer in our market.
Yeah, and I want to, one thing probably comes up is that when you're playing your sport and you're still there, you're getting, you've got a training staff, you've got the weight rooms and things like that. So how does that translate? And are you trying to fill some of that gap, like knowing now that when these athletes are done, that they kind of can, like you said, continue the training to age appropriately?
It just starts with you got to think about a couple things. Like we're busy. We're a busy society now. So like you don't have the time to do an hour, a 30-minute warm up, a 30-minute cool down, an hour workout and a cold tub. Like that's not life. So it's not to get too exercise science nerdy here, but it's actually having a gift for program design, having enough stimulus versus enough recovery. When you are past your sport, you need your workouts to build you, not break you. So one of the things that we are very hard against in our industry is like you should not be crippled after every workout. You should be able to work out the next day where you haven't done so much volume that you can't perform or move forward the next day. So unfortunately, like the sandbox we live in is pop culture, boutique fitness. I think it's a funny way to kind of look at it. I just think we offer something unique within that because most of the people we compete with, it's one speed, 100 miles an hour. And that's just not a sustainable thing if you want to take this, if you want to strength train into your 50s and 60s. So yeah, it's just different. I get why other ones work, but I think we kind of stand alone in the industry for what we do, and I think that's why we're making a lot of noise right now.
That's great. Yeah. So how can people find, Metabolic, both from a perspective if they want to work out or from a perspective maybe being interested in buying a franchise?
Yeah, just the name MADabolic.com. So MADabolic.com. That'll get you to our website, and that can take you on an educational journey of kind of who we are. It can get you to the franchising opportunity. If you're an Instagram fan, same kind of thing at Metabolic. And then me personally, yes, I'm one of the founders and the chief concept officer of the company that we own, but I'm also very active on LinkedIn on a personal level. And most of the stuff I like talking about is entrepreneurship, creating a niche style business versus kind of like the shotgun approach for everybody. So like I welcome any DMs for people that may have questions for me. That's the platform that I like to be on. I just made a choice. I feel like it's a professional platform for where I want to be today. So yeah, if anyone ever wants to reach me, it's not hard to find me.
That's great. This has been great. And you can find us alumnidirect.com. The podcast is on our Alumni Direct YouTube channel, also across all the different podcast networks. And this is such an important topic. I think, I always say that we'd like to help at least one athlete. Obviously, we want to help a lot more than that. But I think the moral of the story is there's a lot of help, and we really do want to teach and inspire athletes that there is life after sports. So, Brandon, again, thank you so much. It's been great.
Well, thanks for having me. I love this conversation as much as any of them. So I think it's important with what you're doing. And if there's any way I can contribute, I'd be happy to be involved in the mission.
Yeah, that sounds great.